Today is March the 3rd, 2024, and the historical significance of today actually may evade many of us. We may be living our lives oblivious to the significance of today. The 3rd of March, 1924 was a day in which the final semblance of any uniformity, any global unity of the Muslims was effectively abolished. The Ottoman Khilafah Sultanate was effectively abolished on the 3rd of March 1924, plunging us into the depth of darkness that we're seeing today, we're living today, we're experiencing today, we bemoan today. The disempowerment, quite frankly, of the Muslim world globally officially began 100 years today. And, somebody who works on Islamic history, it is quite astonishing to realize that 100 years later, we haven't learned many of our lessons. We're still making the same errors. We're still falling for the same traps. We're still reactionaries rather than being proactive and being pragmatic about the situation we find ourselves in. From Gaza all the way to Syria, all the way to the Central African Republic, we find the same errors, the same mistakes, the same tragedies. What's happening in Sudan today, what's happening in Somalia, what's happening across the Muslim world continues to shock us and continues to stimulate a great deal of trepidation, a great deal of anxiety, a great deal of sadness in us, and it should. However, we've had 100 years, one entire century of experiencing the same triggers, the same errors, the same symptoms, the same tragedies. What are we learning from this? What exactly do we learn from these continual and almost serial, at this point almost predictable, tragedies within the Muslim world? We've had an entire century. There are many nations today who have had less time and have achieved a lot more in that time than we have as a global community of 2 billion Muslim men and women. It's a timely opportunity right now for us to sit back, to contemplate, to study, to look into, to review, quite frankly, and to assess our situation as a global Ummah 100 years later. It is also an opportunity for us to really delve within ourselves and to ask some quite interesting and important questions. What will it take for the Muslim world in the next 100 years? Hopefully it doesn't take that long, but to reverse the order of things. What will it take for us as an Ummah, as a people, to remediate the escalating crises and problems across the Muslim world? By Allah, in 2024, we are seeing so much tragedy, so much devastating situations across the Muslim world. It is hard to keep up with all the news. It is hard to keep up with all the travesty. It is hard to maintain updates on everything at once. There is just so much happening. But we've had 100 years. And as somebody who studies and who conveys history, the Muslim history, it is quite disheartening that after 100 years, we're still asking the same questions. We're still discussing the same points. We're still repeating the same narrative and rhetoric after 100 years. It would appear as if little has been achieved in terms of progress. We're not moving towards the solutions we need to move towards. And more devastatingly, we may not have the right priorities. We may not have the right perspectives to be able to move forward productively and positively. And so it is really a time of contemplation. It's really a time of introspection, and we should really begin to ask the question, are we going to go through another century experiencing the same triggers, the same outcomes, the same experiences? Where can we improve? On an individual and collective level, one of the easiest and the most accessible means of reversing the tide is to lift the ignorance of the Muslims. We begin by our own individual selves, by studying recent history, by opening books, by investing time and effort to understand the root causes of many of these systematic failures and catastrophes. We can no longer afford to be reactionaries. What are the causes for these tragedies to begin with? Because if we can understand that, we have a better chance of remediating and recovering from the trauma. But we cannot continue to be triggered every single time by the same cycle of tragedy, the same cycle of travesty and pain. And every single time we have the same reaction. Something has to change, something has to evolve. So learning history is important because, again, there's very little that happens today that has no precedent in history, and more particularly in contemporary history. Very little of our problems as an ummah today are unprecedented. You can almost find a precedent, an immediate precedent in this century very easily. And in doing so, we have a better chance of being able to remediate, at least to lessen the blow, the impacts. We've had 100 years of the situation in Palestine. We had an entire century. 100 years since the Balfour Declaration, even more than 100 years. Since the Sykes-Picot Agreement, we've had 100 years, and still we are unable to find a solution to the issue in Palestine. What are we learning from this, in fact? What are the key takeaways? How can we strategize and organize in a way that would prevent, or at least lessen, the likelihood of this happening again in the next 3 to 5 years? How much more of this can we experience with the same cycle, with the same reaction, with the same outcomes? Something has to change. And that begins with understanding the historical precedents, the context, the historical errors that were also made at the beginning, and how we can overturn this cycle from happening again. Another key component really is to be more responsible, because I guess it is natural to want to blame others. It is natural to want to point the fingers at others when catastrophe strikes, but we've been doing that for an entire century and nothing has changed. We have never resolved any of our problems by blaming others, be it America, be it the Zionists, be it the leaders in the Muslim world. None of these is a solution to the problem at hand. There has to be another solution. But it isn't convenient because it involves doing something, and doing so for the long term, and being consistent, and sacrificing time and effort. It requires real action. And as we know, that is not something that is as appealing to the masses as a few demonstrations, a few videos, a few exposés, being critical of leadership. But I think it is time we looked at ourselves in the mirror and begin to really ask ourselves the questions: how are we contributing to the broader scale, the broader perspective? How are we helping the Ummah? How are we individually going to contribute towards a positive outturn, an overturn, a revolution, effectively, an intellectual revolution, to improve the situation globally? And one way is to make yourself less ignorant of the situation at hand, to make yourself more knowledgeable of the historical catalogue, of the precedents, to make yourself more knowledgeable and grounded in key terms, so that you're able to not only contextualize things better, but to respond appropriately. This is not going to be resolved by changing leaders. We've seen the revolutions in recent times. Revolutions don't work for the Muslims. It doesn't work, okay? It doesn't work. You can blame as many leaders as you like. You can point fingers as many times as you like. That is not the solution. The solution is more immediate, is more accessible to us, and that is for us individually and as an ummah, as communities, to begin making positive strides towards long-lasting solutions. And that may involve reading more, that may involve committing yourself more to the deen, that may involve the small actions that are not as thrilling or not as exciting as posting on social media or attending marches publicly, but these are the actions that make an impact in the long term. And we really need to begin questioning ourselves individually and collectively concerning what we can do, because change begins with the people. If you expect the leaders to make a change, and the leaders and the governments of the world to lead the way for change, you haven't read history properly, and you have no understanding of the current reality. We have to be responsible. We also have to be less emotional. I think the Muslim world at large, again, it's a generic observation, it doesn't apply to everyone, but we are characterized as being very emotive, very emotional, emotionally unstable. Our reaction to crises and situations of emergency is typically one of anger, outrage, sadness, frustration. These are all destructive emotions. They don't build anything. They don't build anything. This is not how we respond to emergencies. But it is a consistent response that we see and we witness time and time and time again. And it's become the de facto response of the Muslims. People know already that trigger a Muslim community and this is what you get out of it. Has that served us at all in the last century? I don't think it has. It has not served us in any way. We haven't resolved any issues that way. Perhaps now it's time to be more disciplined, more principled, to be willing to follow the actual guidelines of Islam. Because up until now, many of us have, we've been given the solutions, but we have somehow preferred our own solutions. We've tried the revolutions, we've tried the revolts, we've tried blaming leadership. Nothing has worked. Let's try something a bit different. Let's try taking our religion more seriously. Let's try implementing Islam in our daily lives for the long term. Let's try something different. Let's try that. And let us see if in the next 50 to 60 years, there is a visible and positive impact on how the Muslim world in general stands. It's 100 years, and by Allah, we're making the same errors. We are seeing the same cycles, and we are reactionary. We are reacting to the same cues that we were reacting to 100 years ago. Very little has changed. And so it is a time for us to reconsider, to review, to analyze, to assess, genuinely, to ask ourselves individually and collectively, what has to change for this situation to be improved? What has to change? How do we go forward from here? The old solutions have not worked. The old solutions have not worked. What has to change?